The transport ship dropped out of hyperspace with a shudder that made the hull groan. Through the viewport, the fortress moon of Valdris filled the entire view, its surface covered in training facilities and defensive towers that stretched toward the stars. Marcus Reed pressed his face against the cold glass and watched the ancient structures grow larger as they approached the docking bay. He was the first human to ever set foot on Valdris, the first of his species to attend the Galactic Defense Academy. The weight of that responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders, but he kept his expression calm as the other passengers began gathering their gear. Around him, cadets from a dozen different worlds checked their equipment one final time before disembarking. The Kronan cadet next to him was encased in a crystalline exoskeleton that hummed with power. The suit amplified his movements and filtered the air he breathed, protecting his silicon-based biology from the carbon-rich atmosphere they were about to enter. Across the aisle, an aquatic Neptune floated in a mobility tank that would allow her to function on dry land while keeping her gills moist. Her transparent helmet reflected the lights of the docking bay as they drew closer. Marcus looked down at his own clothes, standard military fatigues, combat boots, and a simple duffel bag containing his personal belongings. No powered armor. No environmental suit, no technological assistance of any kind, just cloth and leather and the body underneath. He had tried to explain to the Academy officials that humans did not need such equipment, but they had insisted on sending him the standard gear anyway. The massive crate containing his essential survival equipment was probably being unloaded into the cargo bay right now. The ship touched down with a gentle bump, and the airlock began its cycling sequence. Marcus stood and shouldered his bag, falling into line with the other new arrivals. The Kronan cadet's suit made mechanical whirring sounds as he moved, while the Neptune's tank glided silently on repulsor fields. A tall, thin cadet from the low-gravity rim worlds moved carefully in his support harness. His bones too fragile for the standard gravity aboard the ship, the airlock opened with a hiss, and they stepped onto Valdris for the first time. The air was thin and cold, carrying the metallic taste of recycled atmosphere. Marcus breathed deeply and felt his lungs adapt automatically to the lower oxygen content. Around him, his fellow cadets adjusted their suit settings and checked their environmental readings. Commander Thale was waiting for them in the reception area, his chrome-plated armor gleaming under the harsh lights. The Valdarian officer stood nearly 8 feet tall, his forearms ending in mechanical claws that could crush steel. His helmet was a work of art, decorated with the medals and honors he had earned in 3 decades of service. When he spoke, his voice was amplified by speakers built into his chest plate. "Welcome to the Galactic Defense Academy," he said, his eyes scanning the new arrivals. "You are here because your worlds have recognized your potential as defenders of civilized space. The training you will receive here has been refined over centuries to produce the finest soldiers in the galaxy." His gaze stopped when it reached Marcus, and the commander's expression shifted to confusion. The human stood calmly in his simple uniform, breathing the thin air without assistance, showing no signs of discomfort despite the temperature that was several degrees below freezing. "Cadet Reed," Commander Thale said, his mechanical voice carrying a note of concern. "Where is your environmental suit?" Marcus straightened to attention. "I do not require one, sir." The commander's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. "The atmospheric composition of this facility is not suitable for unprotected biological forms. Your species requirements were forwarded to us by your government. We have prepared appropriate equipment." "With respect, sir, those preparations were unnecessary. Humans are capable of functioning in this environment without technological assistance." A murmur ran through the group of cadets. The Neptune's tank speakers crackled as she whispered to her companion, while the Kronan's suit sensors focused on Marcus with obvious interest. Commander Thale's claws clicked against his armor as he processed this information. "Cadet Reed, the temperature in this facility is currently minus 15 degrees. The atmospheric pressure is 60% of standard, and the oxygen content is 18%. These conditions would be fatal to most species within minutes." Marcus nodded respectfully. "I understand, sir." However, these conditions are well within human tolerance limits. The commander was silent for a long moment, his processors running calculations. Finally, he gestured to one of his subordinates, a smaller Valdarian whose armor was marked with medical symbols. Dr. Korax, please scan the human cadet. I want to verify his biological functions. The medical officer approached with a handheld scanner, its sensors humming as they analyzed Marcus's vital signs. The device beeped softly, and Dr. Korax studied the readings with growing amazement. Commander, he said, his voice filled with wonder, the human's physiology is functioning normally. His heart rate is steady, his blood oxygen levels are optimal, and his body temperature is maintaining itself without difficulty. I detect no signs of environmental stress whatsoever. Commander Thale stared at Marcus for several seconds before speaking again. Very well, Cadet Reed. If you are certain you do not require protective equipment, we will proceed with orientation. However, medical personnel will monitor your condition closely. If you show any signs of distress, you will be immediately fitted with appropriate gear. Understood, sir. The commander turned to address the entire group. Follow me to the orientation chamber. You will receive your room assignments, class schedules, and equipment distributions. The academy operates on a strict schedule and punctuality is essential. As they walked through the corridors of the facility, Marcus could feel the stares of his fellow cadets. Their suit sensors were undoubtedly recording everything, analyzing his movements and trying to understand how he was surviving in conditions that would kill most of them. The RIM cadet's support harness whined with effort as he struggled to keep up, while the Nepthune's tank occasionally bumped against the walls when she misjudged the corridor width. Marcus simply walked, his breathing steady and his stride confident. The cold air felt refreshing against his skin, and the reduced gravity made his steps feel lighter than usual. He had trained in environments far more hostile than this back on Earth, in the deep caves of the Himalayas and the frozen wastes of Antarctica. This was, by human standards, quite comfortable. The orientation chamber was a vast hall filled with holographic displays showing the Academy's history and achievements. Hundreds of species were represented in the honor rolls, their greatest warriors immortalized in light and sound. Commander Thale began his presentation, but Marcus found his attention drifting to the other cadets. They were all impressive in their own ways, products of advanced civilizations with technologies that could reshape matter and bend space itself. But they were also fragile, dependent on their machines for survival in environments that humans would find merely challenging. He wondered what they would think when they learned what Earth was really like. The first week of classes passed in a blur of theoretical instruction and equipment familiarization. Marcus sat through lectures on xenobiology, tactical analysis, and weapon systems while his fellow cadets struggled to adapt to the Academy's demanding schedule. The Chronon cadet, who had introduced himself as Crix, spent hours each day in maintenance bays calibrating his exoskeleton. The Nepthune, Yara, required constant monitoring of her tank's chemical balance to prevent her gills from becoming infected in the artificial environment. Marcus learned their names and backgrounds during meal periods when the cadets were allowed to remove their helmets and speak freely. Dex, the RIM cadet, came from a world where the gravity was so low that his people had evolved hollow bones and enlarged lungs. His support harness was a marvel of engineering that let him function in standard gravity, but it also made him clumsy and slow. He ate special supplements that strengthened his fragile skeleton and prevented his organs from collapsing under their own weight. How do you do it? Dex asked one evening as they sat in the cafeteria. His voice was thin and reedy, emerging from the speaker mounted on his chest. How do you function without any assistance at all? Marcus looked up from his meal, a standard nutrient paste that tasted like cardboard. I suppose I never thought about it. This is just how humans are. Crix's crystalline features shifted in what might have been a frown. But your world's conditions were included in our briefing materials. Earth has variable gravity, toxic atmospheric compositions, extreme temperature fluctuations, and radiation exposure that would sterilize most planets. How did your species survive long enough to develop civilization? We adapted, Marcus said simply. When the environment was too cold, we learned to make fire. When it was too hot, we found shade. When the air was thin, our lungs became more efficient. When predators threatened us, we became better predators. Yara's tank speakers crackled as she processed this information. But surely you must have had some technological assistance. Genetic modification, selective breeding programs, artificial enhancement of some kind? Marcus shook his head. No, nothing like that. Just natural selection over millions of years. The weak died, the strong survived, and eventually we became strong enough to survive almost anything. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the facility's communication system. All first-year cadets report to obstacle course. 7 for practical evaluation. Full protective gear required. Marcus followed the others to the equipment bay, where they began the process of checking their suits and weapons. Crix's exoskeleton required a full diagnostic cycle, while Yara's tank needed to be pressurized for the upcoming exercise. Dex's support harness was equipped with additional stabilizers to help him navigate the course's challenging terrain. Marcus stood to one side, still wearing his simple fatigues. A supply officer approached him with a concerned expression. Cadet Reed, your protective equipment is in Storage Bay 12. The course you're about to attempt includes sections with toxic atmosphere, extreme temperatures, and crushing gravitational fields. Without proper protection, you won't survive the first checkpoint. I understand the risks, Marcus replied. But I won't need the equipment. The supply officer looked confused but stepped aside when Commander Thale approached. The Valdarian officer's armor was equipped with additional sensors and communication gear that marked him as the exercise supervisor. Cadet Reed, I've reviewed the course specifications. The toxic gas section alone would kill most species within 30 seconds. The temperature differential between the ice fields and the thermal vents exceeds 300 degrees. The high-gravity zone operates at 4 times standard, enough to crush unprotected bones. Marcus nodded calmly. I've read the specifications as well, sir. I'm confident I can complete the course safely. Commander Thale's mechanical claws clicked as he considered this. Very well, but you will wear monitoring equipment so we can track your vital signs. If you show any signs of distress, you will be immediately extracted from the course. The monitoring equipment was a simple harness with sensors that measured heart rate, blood pressure, and core temperature. Marcus strapped it on and followed the other cadets to the course entrance. The massive doors opened to reveal a hellish landscape of obstacles and challenges, designed to test the limits of both soldier and equipment. The first section was a maze of pipes that leaked toxic gas into the air. The other cadets activated their suits' air filtration systems and moved forward cautiously, their helmet displays showing the chemical composition of the atmosphere around them. Marcus simply took a deep breath and held it, then began running through the maze at a pace that left his armored classmates struggling to keep up. The toxic gas burned his eyes and made his throat raw, but he had experienced worse during survival training in Earth's industrial zones. He navigated by instinct, following air currents and listening for the sound of his fellow cadets' mechanical breathing apparatus. By the time he reached the exit, his lungs were burning, but he was still conscious and mobile. The second section was a field of ice that stretched for nearly a kilometer. The temperature here was cold enough to freeze carbon dioxide, and the wind carried razor-sharp crystals that could cut through metal. The other cadets activated their suit heaters and moved forward in a defensive formation, their boots equipped with special grips to prevent slipping on the treacherous surface. Marcus ran across the ice field in his standard boots, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The cold was intense, but he had trained in similar conditions in the Arctic regions of Earth. He controlled his breathing and kept moving, generating body heat through constant motion. His thin uniform provided little insulation, but his body's natural ability to regulate temperature kept him functional. The third section was the high-gravity zone, where the artificial gravity generators created a crushing environment that simulated the surface of a heavy world. The other cadets moved slowly and carefully, their suits' servos whining with effort as they fought against the increased weight. Each step required tremendous effort, and their progress was measured in meters rather than kilometers. Marcus felt the increased gravity as soon as he entered the zone, his body suddenly weighing 4 times its normal amount. But he had trained in similar conditions using weighted packs and resistance equipment. He adjusted his gait and continued forward, his movements becoming more deliberate but never stopping entirely. The final section was a combination of all 3 challenges: toxic atmosphere, extreme temperature, and crushing gravity. It was designed to be the ultimate test of both equipment and endurance. Most cadets required multiple attempts to complete this section, and some never managed it at all. Marcus entered the final zone and immediately felt the combined assault of all 3 environmental hazards. His lungs burned from the toxic air, his skin stung from the extreme cold, and his muscles ached from the crushing gravity. But he pressed forward, drawing on reserves of strength and endurance that his alien classmates could not understand. When he emerged from the course, his simple uniform was torn and stained. His face was flushed with exertion and his breathing was labored. But he was alive, conscious, and had completed the entire course in a time that set a new academy record. The other cadets stared at him in stunned silence as the medical officers checked his vital signs. His heart rate was elevated but not dangerous. His blood pressure was within normal limits, and his core temperature had barely fluctuated despite the extreme conditions he had endured. Commander Thale approached him with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Cadet Reed, how is this possible? Our best estimates suggested that an unprotected biological form would survive perhaps 10 minutes in that environment." Marcus straightened to attention, still breathing hard from his exertion. "Sir, I come from a world where such conditions are commonplace. This course reminded me of a typical Tuesday on Earth." Word of the humans' performance spread through the academy like wildfire. In the mess halls and recreation areas, cadets from all years gathered to watch recordings of Marcus completing the obstacle course. The footage showed him moving through environments that would kill most species while wearing nothing more than standard fatigues. Senior officers studied the data with growing amazement, while younger cadets whispered among themselves about the strange new arrival, who seemed immune to the dangers that defined their training. Marcus tried to ignore the attention and focus on his studies, but it was impossible to escape the stares and whispered conversations that followed him everywhere. In tactical analysis class, his instructor would pause mid-lecture to ask him about human military doctrine. In xenobiology lab, his classmates peppered him with questions about Earth's ecosystem and the creatures that live there. Even the maintenance staff would stop their work to watch him pass by, their alien features expressing a mixture of curiosity and concern. The breaking point came during his 3rd week at the academy. Marcus was in the library, studying for an upcoming exam on interstellar warfare when a group of senior cadets approached his table. They were 4th-year students, the elite of the academy, and their equipment bore the marks of countless training exercises and real combat operations. Their leader was a centauri named Torvin, whose powered armor was polished to a mirror finish and decorated with achievement ribbons. His helmet was retracted, revealing a face that was humanoid but marked with the distinctive ridge patterns of his species. When he spoke, his voice carried the confidence of someone who had never experienced defeat. "So you're the famous human," Torvin said, his tone carefully neutral. "The one who thinks he doesn't need protection." Marcus looked up from his studies and nodded politely. "I'm Marcus Red. I don't believe we've been introduced. Torvin Kale, senior class combat leader. I've been watching your progress with great interest. Your performance on the obstacle course was quite impressive for a beginner." The other senior cadets chuckled at this backhanded compliment. There were 6 of them in total, representing some of the most militaristic species in the galaxy. Their armor was top of the line, equipped with energy shields, tactical computers, and weapon systems that could level buildings. "Thank you," Marcus said simply. "I'm still learning." Torvin's expression hardened slightly. "Indeed you are. Which is why I thought you might benefit from some additional training." The Academy has combat simulation chambers that can provide more realistic challenges than the standard courses. Perhaps you'd like to join us for a session? Marcus could hear the challenge in Torvin's voice, and he could see the barely concealed hostility in the faces of the other senior cadets. They had spent years building their reputations as the Academy's finest warriors, and his sudden appearance threatened their established hierarchy. I would be honored to learn from more experienced cadets, Marcus replied. Torvin's smile was predatory. Excellent. Meet us in Simulation Chamber 7 in 1 hour. We'll be running a hostile environment scenario, so you'll want to bring your protective gear. Marcus nodded and watched as the senior cadets filed out of the library, their armor clanking. With each step, he knew this was more than just a training exercise. It was a test, a chance for the Academy's elite to prove that technology and experience could overcome whatever natural advantages he might possess. An hour later, Marcus stood in the simulation chamber wearing his standard fatigues, while the senior cadets made final adjustments to their battlesuits. The chamber was a marvel of technology, capable of creating fully immersive environments that could simulate any world or battlefield in the galaxy. The walls hummed with power as the system initialized, and the air shimmered as holographic projectors came online. The scenario is simple, Torvin explained, his voice now amplified by his suit's speakers. Hostile alien world, atmosphere toxic to most species. Aggressive native life forms and environmental hazards that would challenge even our best equipment. The objective is to reach the extraction point on the far side of the simulation area, while defending against all threats. Marcus nodded his understanding. Around him, the other cadets were running system checks and coordinating their tactics through encrypted communication channels. Their armor was a symphony of technology, each suit worth more than most planets' annual budgets. The simulation began with a flash of light, and suddenly they were standing on the surface of an alien world. The sky was a sickly green color, and the air was thick with toxic particulates that would dissolve lung tissue in minutes. The ground beneath their feet was covered in a viscous substance that tried to trap their boots with each step. The senior cadets immediately activated their environmental seals and began moving in formation, their suit sensors scanning for threats. Marcus simply started walking, his nose wrinkling at the acrid smell of the simulated atmosphere. The first attack came from above, as creatures that looked like flying jellyfish descended from the toxic clouds. They moved with surprising speed, their tentacles crackling with bioelectric energy that could overload most electronic systems. The senior cadets responded with coordinated fire, their weapons creating a light show of energy beams and explosive projectiles. Marcus dodged between the energy blasts and grabbed a fallen branch from one of the dead trees that dotted the landscape. The wood was partially petrified, making it heavy and hard enough to serve as a weapon. When one of the creatures dove at him, he swung the branch like a club, connecting with its central body and sending it crashing to the ground. The second wave of attacks came from the ground itself, as burrowing creatures erupted from the toxic soil. They were roughly humanoid in shape, but covered in chitinous armor that deflected most energy weapons. Their claws could tear through steel, and their acidic saliva could dissolve metal in seconds. The senior cadets fell back into a defensive formation, their suits' shields flickering under the assault. Their weapons were effective but slow to recharge, and the creature's natural armor made them difficult to kill. Several of the cadets were already showing signs of damage, their suits' integrity warnings flashing urgent messages. Marcus studied the creature's attack patterns and noticed that they were predictable, always leading with their right claw before following up with their left. He began moving between them, using their own momentum against them. When one lunged at him, he sidestepped and grabbed its arm, using its forward motion to throw it into another creature. The impact sent both aliens tumbling, their armor cracking from the collision. The third and final wave was the most dangerous of all. The simulation's environmental hazards activated, creating a deadly maze of acid geysers, electrical storms, and gravitational anomalies. The senior cadets' suits were pushed to their limits, their systems struggling to compensate for the rapidly changing conditions. Marcus found himself separated from the others, alone in a section of the simulation where the very air seemed to be trying to kill him. The toxic atmosphere was so concentrated that it made his eyes water and his throat burn. The ground beneath his feet was unstable, shifting between solid matter and a liquid state that could drag him down if he moved too slowly, but he had trained. In similar conditions on Earth, in the volcanic regions of the Pacific Ring of Fire and the toxic wastelands left behind by industrial accidents. He knew how to read the signs of danger, how to find safe paths through hostile terrain, and how to survive when everything around him was trying to kill him. He reached the extraction point first, his simple uniform torn and stained, but his body still functional. The senior cadets arrived minutes later, their powered armor damaged and their energy reserves nearly depleted. Several of them had to be carried by their teammates, their suits' life support systems failing under the assault of the simulated environment. Torvin's helmet retracted with a hiss of escaping air, revealing a face twisted with frustration and disbelief. "How?" he demanded. "How did you survive that without protection? Our suits are the most advanced technology in the galaxy, and we barely made it through." Marcus looked at the damaged armor and sophisticated equipment that surrounded him, then at his own simple clothes and unaugmented body. "I suppose," he said quietly, "that there's a difference between surviving with technology and surviving without it." The Academy's leadership was in crisis. In the 3 centuries since its founding, no cadet had ever challenged the fundamental assumptions about survival and combat effectiveness like Marcus Reed. The humans' performance had shattered records and defied scientific understanding. Emergency meetings were called, and experts from across the galaxy were consulted as the Academy struggled to comprehend what they had witnessed. Dr. Nala Oren arrived on Valdris 3 days after the simulation chamber incident. She was the galaxy's leading expert on evolutionary combat biology, a Phylan scientist whose research had shaped military doctrine for dozens of species. Her reputation was built on her ability to analyze any life form and predict its combat capabilities based on evolutionary pressures and environmental factors. Marcus was called to the Academy's medical facility for what was described as a routine evaluation. The building was a gleaming tower of advanced technology, equipped with scanning devices that could analyze matter at the subatomic level. Dr. Oren met him in the main laboratory, her tall, willowy frame draped in the white robes of her profession. "Cadet Rid," she said, her voice carrying the musical tones common to her species. "I've reviewed your performance records with great interest. Your abilities appear to contradict several fundamental principles of xenobiology." Marcus stood at attention, unsure of what was expected of him. "I'm just doing what comes naturally, Doctor." Dr. Oren gestured to a chair surrounded by scanning equipment. "Please sit. We're going to run a series of tests to better understand your physiology. Some of these may be uncomfortable, but I assure you they are necessary." The first test was a simple atmospheric analysis. Marcus was placed in a chamber where the air composition was gradually altered, reducing oxygen levels and introducing various toxic compounds. The doctor's instruments measured his vital signs as the environment became increasingly hostile. "Fascinating," Dr. Oren murmured as she studied the readings. "Your oxygen consumption is decreasing automatically to compensate for the reduced availability. Your metabolic rate is adjusting in real time to maintain optimal brain function. Most species would be unconscious by now." The second test involved temperature extremes. Marcus was moved to a chamber where the temperature was slowly raised to levels that would cook most organic matter. His body began to sweat, a simple but effective cooling mechanism that most species had never developed. When the temperature dropped to freezing and below, his blood vessels constricted and his body began generating heat through involuntary muscle contractions. "Your thermoregulation is remarkable," Dr. Oren observed. "You're maintaining core temperature stability across a range that would kill most life forms. Your body is essentially a biological climate control system." The third test was the most extreme. Marcus was exposed to radiation levels that would sterilize most planets. The energy bombarded his cells, causing damage that should have been fatal within minutes. But his body's repair mechanisms kicked in immediately, healing the damage almost as quickly as it occurred. Dr. Oren's instruments registered readings that shouldn't have been possible. Your cellular repair rate is extraordinary. You're healing radiation damage in real time. Your DNA has redundant error correction mechanisms that I've never seen in any species. The testing continued for hours, with each new challenge revealing another aspect of human evolution that defied conventional understanding. Marcus endured pressure changes that would implode most organs, electrical shocks that would stop most hearts, and chemical exposures that would dissolve most nervous systems. Through it all, his body adapted and survived. His bones were dense enough to withstand crushing forces, his muscles were efficient enough to function in low-oxygen environments, and his nervous system was robust enough to maintain consciousness under conditions that would incapacitate most sentient beings. "I need to understand," Dr. Oren said finally, her voice filled with awe and confusion. "What kind of world could produce such adaptations? Your evolutionary pressures must have been incredible." Marcus thought about how to explain Earth to someone who had never experienced it. "My world is not a kind place," he said slowly. "The weather changes without warning, from scorching heat to freezing cold. The air can become toxic from volcanic eruptions or forest fires. The ground shakes and splits open, swallowing entire cities. The oceans rise and fall, flooding vast areas or leaving them as barren deserts." Dr. Oren's notes were accumulating rapidly as she recorded his words. "But surely your species found ways to shelter from these dangers?" "We tried," Marcus continued, "but the predators were always hunting us. Creatures with claws and teeth that could tear through stone. Beasts that could outrun our fastest runners and outthink our cleverest minds. We learned to hide, but they learned to hunt. We learned to fight, but they learned to kill." The doctor's expression grew more amazed with each revelation. "And your diseases? Surely your medical technology protected you from biological threats?" Marcus shook his head. "The diseases evolved as fast as we did. Viruses that could kill millions, bacteria that could dissolve flesh, parasites that could control minds. We had to develop immune systems that could adapt to new threats constantly. Our bodies became biological warfare laboratories, constantly fighting battles we couldn't even see." Dr. Oren was silent for a long moment, her instruments still recording data from the various tests. "The planet you describe," she said finally, "is what we would classify as a Class 12 death world. Such worlds are considered uninhabitable by any known species. They are used only for mining operations, and even then only with the most advanced protective equipment." "It's home," Marcus said simply. The doctor began running additional scans, her excitement growing as she discovered new aspects of human physiology. "Your muscle density is 3 times higher than it should be for your size. Your bone structure is optimized for impact resistance. Your cardiovascular system can function efficiently across a range of pressures and atmospheric compositions. Your nervous system has redundant pathways that prevent single points of failure." She paused and looked at Marcus with something approaching reverence. "You're not just adapted to survive on a hostile world. You're adapted to thrive in conditions that would destroy most known life forms. Your species didn't just survive evolution, you weaponized it." Marcus was uncomfortable with the doctor's intense scrutiny. "We just did what we had to do to survive." "No," Dr. Oren said firmly. "What you did was extraordinary. Most species encounter evolutionary pressure and adapt by developing tools or technology to overcome their limitations. Your species encountered pressure and adapted by becoming the tools themselves." The testing session concluded with Dr. Oren's assessment, which would be forwarded to the Academy's command structure and distributed to military leaders throughout the galaxy. Her report would fundamentally change how the galactic community viewed humanity and Earth's place in the cosmic order. "Cadet Red," she said as he prepared to leave, "you mentioned that your performance here reminds you of a typical day on Earth. Is this accurate?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Actually, Doctor, this has been relatively easy." Earth, we have to deal with multiple threats simultaneously while maintaining our normal daily activities. Here, I only have to focus on one challenge at a time. Dr. Oren's notes would later record this as the moment when she realized that the galaxy had encountered something unprecedented, a species that had turned survival itself into an art form and had emerged from the crucible of evolution not as victims, but as masters of their own destiny. The implications were staggering. If humans could perform at this level without technological assistance, what would they be capable of once they had access to galactic technology? The thought both thrilled and terrified the assembled experts, who began to understand that they weren't just training a new ally, they were unleashing something that had been forged in the fires of the most hostile world in known space. The final examination was announced with unusual ceremony. For the first time in Academy history, observers from across the galaxy were invited to witness a cadet evaluation. Military leaders, scientific advisors, and government officials filled the observation deck surrounding the Academy's most challenging training ground, a perfect replica of the war-torn planet Zarian. Zarian was legendary among military circles. It was there that the galaxy's most decorated soldiers had earned their reputations during the border wars, fighting against automated defense systems and hostile environmental conditions that had claimed thousands of lives. The planet's surface was a maze of ruins, toxic pools, and unstable terrain that had been shaped by centuries of warfare. Marcus stood with his fellow cadets at the deployment zone, watching as they made final preparations for the 72-hour survival exercise. The objective was simple: navigate through the hostile environment, complete a series of tactical objectives, and reach the extraction point alive. Most cadets required multiple attempts to pass this test, and some never managed it at all. Crix was adjusting his exoskeleton's power distribution systems, ensuring that his suit would have enough energy to last the full duration of the exercise. His crystalline armor gleamed under the artificial lights, each facet precisely calibrated to deflect energy weapons and absorb impact damage. The suit's computer systems were running final diagnostics, checking every component for potential failure. YA floated in her mobility tank, her aquatic form moving gracefully through the life-supporting fluid. Her tank was equipped with additional armor plating for this exercise, and her weapon systems had been upgraded with the latest targeting computers. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying tactical manuals and practicing combat maneuvers. Dex was strapped into his most advanced support harness, a marvel of engineering that would allow him to function in the high-gravity sections of the course. His fragile bones were protected by an outer shell of impact-resistant material, and his enlarged lungs were supplemented by a compact oxygen recycling system. He looked nervous but determined. Marcus wore his standard fatigues and carried a simple pack containing water and basic supplies. No armor, no weapons, no technological assistance of any kind. The observers in the viewing galleries focused their attention on him, their instruments recording every detail of his appearance and behavior. Commander Thale approached the group, his chrome armor reflecting the harsh lights of the deployment zone. Cadets, this exercise will test everything you have learned during your time at the Academy. The environment you are about to enter has been designed to challenge the limits of both your equipment and your training. Success requires not just individual skill, but the ability to work as a team. He paused and looked directly at Marcus. Cadet Reed, you have consistently demonstrated abilities that defy conventional understanding. This exercise will determine whether those abilities translate to real-world combat effectiveness. The deployment began with a transport drop that simulated insertion into a hostile combat zone. The cadets were loaded into individual pods and launched toward the surface. At high speed, the pods were designed to protect their occupants during the violent deceleration that followed, using energy fields and inertial dampeners to prevent fatal injuries. Marcus's pod was the simplest of the group, containing only basic life support and a primitive parachute system. As it plummeted toward the surface, he could feel the crushing forces that would have killed most unprotected beings. But his body had evolved to handle such stresses, his bones and organs capable of withstanding impacts that would shatter Conventional materials dot the pods scattered across the training ground, each cadet landing in a different section of the hostile environment. Marcus hit the ground hard, his pod's parachute only partially deploying before impact. He rolled with the landing, his body absorbing the shock through techniques learned from millions of years of evolutionary pressure. The landscape around him was a nightmare of twisted metal and poisonous pools. The air was thick with toxic particles that would corrode most materials within hours. Automated defense systems scanned the area constantly, ready to engage any target that moved carelessly through their detection zones. Marcus's first objective was to locate and secure a communication relay that would allow him to coordinate with his teammates. The device was hidden somewhere in the ruins of what had once been a major city. Now reduced to rubble and debris by centuries of warfare, he moved through the ruins with fluid grace, his senses alert to every danger. The toxic atmosphere made his eyes water and his throat burn, but he had experienced worse during training exercises in Earth's industrial zones. The unstable terrain tried to trap his feet with each step, but he had learned to read the signs of dangerous ground during countless hikes through Earth's swamps and marshlands. The automated defense systems were his greatest challenge. These were military-grade weapons designed to eliminate any intruder, equipped with sensors that could detect the slightest movement or heat signature. Most cadets relied on their armors, stealth systems to avoid detection, but Marcus had no such protection. Instead, he used tactics learned from Earth's most successful predators. He moved when the wind was blowing, masking his scent and the sound of his movements. He stayed low to the ground, using the ruins as cover while studying the patrol patterns of the automated sentries. He learned to time his movements with the natural rhythms of the environment, becoming part of the landscape rather than fighting against it. The first communication relay was hidden in the basement of a collapsed building, guarded by a defensive turret that could track and eliminate targets within a 100-meter radius. Marcus watched the turret's movements for nearly an hour, noting the slight delay in its tracking system and the blind spot created by a fallen beam. When he finally moved, it was with the speed and precision of a natural hunter. He sprinted across the open ground during the turret's tracking delay, dove through the blind spot, and reached the relay before the weapon could acquire his position. The device was damaged but functional, and he managed to establish contact with his teammates. The second objective was more challenging: neutralize a series of automated weapons, platforms that were preventing civilian evacuation from a simulated disaster zone. These platforms were equipped with energy shields and multiple weapon systems designed to withstand assault from heavily armed military units. Marcus's teammates were struggling with this challenge. Their weapons were effective, but slow to recharge, and the platform shields could deflect most energy attacks. The exercise was designed to test their ability to work together, combining their different capabilities to overcome a superior force. Marcus studied the problem from a different perspective. The platforms were designed to fight enemies who relied on technology and conventional tactics, but they were not designed to fight an enemy who could think and adapt like a natural predator. He began collecting debris from the ruins around him, pieces of metal and concrete that could serve as improvised weapons. The platform sensors were focused on detecting energy signatures and metallic objects, but they had difficulty tracking organic materials moving at irregular speeds. His attack came from multiple directions at once. He threw debris to create false targets, forcing the platforms to waste energy on phantom threats. He used the ruins as cover, moving through spaces too small for conventional soldiers while their armor. He exploited the slight delay in their targeting systems, staying mobile and unpredictable. The platforms fell one by one, their sophisticated systems unable to adapt to an enemy that fought without rules or patterns. Marcus's teammates watched in amazement as he dismantled million-credit weapon systems using nothing but rocks and tactical intelligence. The final objective was the most difficult of all: rescue a simulated wounded soldier from a zone of environmental hazards that included acid pools, unstable gravity fields, and atmospheric conditions that would kill most life forms within minutes. Marcus's teammates were exhausted by this point. their equipment damaged and their energy reserves nearly depleted. The hazard zone was beyond their capabilities, even with their advanced protective gear. But Marcus had been growing stronger. Throughout the exercise, his body adapting to the hostile environment and drawing energy from the challenge itself. He entered the hazard zone alone, his body automatically adjusting to each new threat. The acid pools were similar to the volcanic springs he had trained in on Earth, requiring careful navigation but not impossible to traverse. The unstable gravity fields were disorienting, but his inner ear had evolved to handle the irregular motion patterns common on his homeworld. The simulated wounded soldier was actually a sophisticated android designed to test rescue protocols. It was heavy, awkward to carry, and equipped with sensors that would register any rough handling. Most cadets needed specialized equipment to transport it safely through the hazard zone. Marcus lifted the android over his shoulders and began the journey back to safety. The additional weight made his movements more difficult, but his body was designed for carrying heavy loads across difficult terrain. His ancestors had hunted creatures many times their own size, learning to work together to bring down prey and carry it back to safety. The return journey was a masterpiece of tactical movement. Marcus navigated through the hazards while protecting his cargo, using his knowledge of the environment to find the safest path. When he finally emerged from the hazard zone, the android was undamaged and the mission was complete. The exercise ended with Marcus and his teammates gathered at the extraction point, their objectives completed and their survival confirmed. The other cadets looked at him with a mixture of respect and bewilderment, their advanced equipment having proven less effective than his natural capabilities. Commander Thale approached the group, his expression unreadable behind his polished helmet. "Cadets, you have completed the Academy's most challenging exercise. Your performance will be analyzed and evaluated by our finest military minds." He paused and looked directly at Marcus. "Cadet Reed, your methods were unconventional, but your results were exceptional. You have demonstrated that sometimes the most advanced technology is the one that has been refined by millions of years of evolution." The observers in the viewing galleries were already preparing their reports, documents that would reshape military doctrine across the galaxy. They had witnessed something unprecedented, a soldier who needed no weapons because he was a weapon, who required no armor because he had been forged by the most hostile environment in known space. Marcus stood with his teammates, still breathing hard from the exertion but otherwise unharmed. He had passed the Academy's final test, but more importantly, he had proven that humanity's greatest strength was not in the technology they could build, but in the incredible adaptability they had inherited from their Deathworld origins. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. And somewhere in the depths of space, Earth continued its endless rotation, spinning through the cosmos like a blue marble that had somehow produced the most successful predator species in galactic history.